is an antecedent? And, before my son was diagnosed with autism, I think I had heard of this word before, but had no idea what it meant. Wasn't something that I was using in my everyday conversation. So now I understand that it's largely half of my life that I look at through a lens that has to do with antecedents. So what is it? All right, here is our actual definition: antecedent. Anything that occurs or is present immediately before the behavior of interest. Still meant nothing to me when I looked this up. What the heck does that have to do with my life? And then our working definition of this is what happened before. Very simply, when we talk about behavior, and as a parent or as a teacher, it used to drive me mad because if somebody said, what's happening that's preventing you from getting to the good stuff, or what's kicking your can today, I could usually get it down to, well, so-and-so is doing X, Y, or Z. That would be the behavior, right? And that was the thing that I was focused on. Well, they're throwing paper in my classroom, and I don't like that. That's the behavior that's happening. And I, as a parent and as a teacher, sometimes before I knew what I was doing, would get into that habit of yakking at them about it. Well, stop that. Don't do that. Don't you understand why that's not a good idea? Somebody could get hurt. This is not how it, yakety yak, that Peanuts voice of the teacher who goes, womp, 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 right? Because they're not really listening to it. And what I've learned over the years is that behavior, we all want to change the behavior, but the actual behavior itself is sometimes just going to be too much for us to do. Because what are we going to do? Tie their hands down and not let them throw paper? You physically can't make someone stop doing a behavior, but the power is in looking at what the antecedent is, which is the thing that happened before the behavior, and in the consequence, which is what happens after the behavior. This is where the power is. If you think about the child who's sitting in a doctor's office and kicking his foot against the chair, and you want the child to be quiet, and again, you go back to the stop that, stop that. Don't do that. Stop that. Stop that. At what point do we realize that's not getting it done? If we begin to look at behavior in that 3-term contingent way of looking at it, that there's an antecedent, something happened before the child started kicking the leg of the chair. Something happened. What was it? Was it that the child got bored? Was it that somebody asked the child to do something that they didn't want to do? Was there a noise that happened? Was there a light that went on? Something happened that created this bubble in which the behavior happened. Now, we can deal with it with a consequence. We can, if the child is at a reasoning stage and has enough receptive language, we can say to the child, don't do that or something is going to happen, or stop doing that and something will happen, right? We can do that. But a lot of times we can use this idea of antecedent to get there before the behavior happens. If we know that a child is likely to go into a doctor's office and start kicking the chair, and we look at that behavior and go, why is that happening? We always know on this show that all behavior has some sort of a reward or it won't keep happening, right? So what is the reward for kicking the chair? And if it's happening out of boredom, maybe the reward is that it makes a noise, which kind of passes the time. Maybe the reward is that mom starts acting like a complete buffoon and going, stop that, which is pretty entertaining, you got to admit. So what do we do beforehand so that the child doesn't get bored and doesn't need that attention and that show, that floor show that mom is doing? Maybe it means bringing an activity that could be a cell phone, it could be a coloring book, depending on the child's age and skill, right? To give them something to do so that we don't get to the point where they need to be kicking the chair. I learned as a classroom teacher that if kids were throwing paper in my classroom, it's because I didn't set things up to make them so excited to be doing something else that they had no time to think about throwing paper. So whenever we start to look at a behavior, when, even now, if somebody, if I go to school and the teacher said, oh, we had a problem today, such and such happened, right? I always say, what happened before? Because if we know what happened before, and if we can somehow change those circumstances, we're going to be more effective at changing the behavior than standing there and saying, stop that, don't do that, do this instead, right? The example when we were talking with Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson and Dr. Grampiche last week, Nancy was saying that something had happened with her son when he was making his eggs and the cheese. And there was a conversation between her son and dad about that he was using too much cheese. And Dr. Grampiche said, I think we need an antecedent modification here. Instead of it being a discussion every morning about him using too much cheese, let's just get the bag of cheese, Daiya cheese, that's, has no actual milk in it, and let's separate it into little baggies that we give to him and say, here, make your eggs, and this is how much cheese. It's pre-measured. There's no discussion about it. And, he's back to making his eggs, happy camper, and there's no argument, there's no meltdown, there's no stress, right? And I'm happy to say that Nancy called me and said it has worked like a charm. That is an antecedent modification. You get there before the crisis. You get there before the behavior. And it's amazing when you can make an antecedent modification work, how great it is. So remember, antecedent is what happened before, and you do have a whole lot of power when it comes to what happened before. You can do this with yourself as well. If you're thinking, ooh, I want to change this behavior that I have, and you ask yourself, okay, when I engage in this behavior, what is the thing that happens right before? If you're eating late at night, you might ask yourself, what is happening right before I find myself at the refrigerator, and can I change that? Ooh, powerful, powerful, powerful behavior change when you start to think of things as having an antecedent.